My name is Rachel Donovan. I am 31 years old. 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in a hospital parking lot at 11:47 at night, and I saw my husband standing under a streetlight with his arms wrapped around a woman I had never seen before. He was stroking her hair. She was crying into his shoulder, and he was whispering something I couldn't hear. I sat frozen in my car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I did something I am not proud of. I took out my phone and recorded every second of it. What happened after that changed me in ways I am still trying to understand. But before I tell you what I found out, take a second to like this video and subscribe to HeartPath Stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to where this all really began. My husband and I have been married for 7 years. His name is Daniel, and when I met him, I thought he was the most steady, reliable person I had ever known in my life. Not flashy. Not the kind of man who walked into a room and made everyone turn their heads. But the kind of man who remembered that I liked extra foam on my latte. The kind who left a light on when he knew I was driving home late. The kind who held my hand at the dentist even though he thought it was silly, because he knew I was afraid. We got married young, at least young by our friends' standards. I was 24, he was 26, and everyone around us smiled those polite smiles that meant they were giving us 2 years, maybe 3. But here we are, 7 years later. Or at least, we were. The past year had been hard, not dramatic hard, not the kind of hard that shows up in arguments and slammed doors. The quiet kind. The kind where you look across the dinner table and realize you have been talking about grocery lists and mortgage payments for so long that you genuinely cannot remember the last time you laughed together. Really laughed. The kind where your stomach hurts and your eyes water. We had our daughter, Maya, 18 months ago. She is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my life, and I mean that without any exaggeration. But becoming a mother rewired something in me that I did not expect. I became consumed. Completely and totally consumed. Every thought, every worry, every free second went toward her. Her sleep schedule, her milestones, whether she was eating enough, whether the daycare was the right fit, whether I was doing enough, being enough, giving enough. And Daniel? Daniel was still there. He came home every evening. He cooked dinner 3 nights a week. He got up for the 3 a.m., feeding without being asked during those early months. But somewhere in the fog of new parenthood, I had stopped seeing him the way I used to. He had become part of the furniture of my life. Reliable, present. Invisible in the way that only the people we love most can become invisible. About 4 months before that night in the parking lot, I started noticing small things. He was quieter than usual. Not sulking, not distant in an obvious way, just interior. Like he was carrying something heavy but carrying it very carefully so I wouldn't notice the weight. I asked him once if something was wrong. He said he was tired from work. I accepted that because I was tired too, and because it was easier than pressing further. Then came the phone. Daniel had never been secretive about his phone. In 7 years, he had never once angled the screen away from me, never left the room to take a call. But around month 3 of what I was now privately calling his quiet spell, I noticed he had changed his lock screen passcode. I noticed he excused himself to the back porch twice in 1 week to take calls, both times saying it was work. I noticed that he came to bed later than usual on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and when I asked what he was doing, he said he was reading. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was exhausted and postpartum and projecting my own anxieties onto a man who had given me no real reason for suspicion. I told myself all of this, and I mostly believed it. Then came that Tuesday night. Maya had a fever. It came on fast, the way fevers do with toddlers. 1 minute she was fine, and the next she was limp and glassy-eyed and burning up against my neck. I called her pediatrician, who said that given her temperature and the fact that she had been tugging at her ear all day, I should bring her into the urgent care attached to St. Michael's Hospital. Daniel was away for work that night. He traveled occasionally for his job in logistics, usually 2 or 3 nights a month, always to the same distribution hub 2 hours away. He had left that morning and wasn't expected back until Wednesday. I bundled Maya into her car seat, grabbed the diaper bag, and drove to the hospital. It took 40 minutes, longer than usual, because of a traffic backup on Route 9. By the time I got there, Maya had fallen asleep against my shoulder, still warm but calmer. The nurse checked her in quickly, and after about 20 minutes with the doctor, we had our answer: a double ear infection. Antibiotics, children's Tylenol, and rest. I paid at the front desk, carried Maya back out to the parking lot, and was strapping her into her car seat when I heard a voice. A woman's voice, soft and broken, saying something like, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." I wasn't trying to listen. I was focused on the buckle of the car seat, the way you always are at midnight when your brain is running on fumes. But then I heard another voice. And that voice stopped me completely. It was Daniel's voice. I stood up slowly from the back seat and turned around. About 40 feet away, under one of the tall parking lot lights, my husband was standing with a woman. She was maybe my age, maybe a few years older, dark hair pulled back, wearing a coat I didn't recognize. His arms were around her, her face was pressed against his shoulder. And he was rubbing her back slowly, the same way he rubbed my back when I couldn't sleep, and saying something too quiet for me to make out. My whole body went cold. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably 10 seconds. My brain was doing that thing where it refuses to process what your eyes are clearly seeing. Then something automatic took over, and I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and started recording. I got about 90 seconds of footage. The two of them, close together, his hand in her hair, her gripping the front of his jacket. Then she pulled back slightly and said something, and he nodded and said something back, and she laughed, a small, wet, exhausted laugh, and he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I stopped recording. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the phone twice getting it back into my pocket. Maya stirred in the back seat and made a small sound, and somehow that sound was the thing that snapped me back into my body. I closed her door as quietly as I could. I walked around to the driver's side. I sat down. I closed the door. And I did not cry, because I was too far past crying. I just sat there, completely still, and stared at the steering wheel. Then I pulled up Daniel's contact and I typed, "I'm at Street Michael's. Maya had a fever. I saw you." I sent it before I could think about it. Then I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home. He called 4 times before I got to the end of the parking lot. I didn't answer. He texted twice. I didn't look. I drove home in a silence so complete it felt physical, like something pressing against my ears. I put Maya to bed. I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark. And I waited. He was home in 22 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I heard the front door. I heard him drop his keys on the counter the way he always did. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow and careful. Then the bedroom door opened and the light from the hallway fell across the floor, and he was standing in the doorway looking at me. He did not look like a man who had been caught. He looked like a man who had been dreading something for a very long time and had finally arrived at the moment he could no longer avoid. "Rachel," he said. "Don't," I said. "Just don't start with my name like that. Just say it." He came into the room and sat down on his side of the bed, not close to me, and he put his hands on his knees, and he looked at the floor for a long moment. And then he said, "The woman you saw is named Christine. She's my sister." I stared at him. "You don't have a sister," I said. "You have a brother. Kevin. That's it." He exhaled slowly. "She's my half-sister," he said. "My dad had a daughter before he met my mom. I didn't know she existed until 8 months ago." The room was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the baby monitor on the nightstand, the soft static of Maya's breathing. 8 months, I said. 8 months, he repeated. He told me everything that night. All of it, slowly and carefully, the way you tell someone something you have been rehearsing in your head for a long time. His father, who had passed away 4 years before Daniel and I got married, had had a brief relationship in his early 20s before he met Daniel's mother. A daughter had come from that relationship. The woman, Christine's mother, had moved away and never told Daniel's father about the pregnancy. Christine had grown up not knowing who her biological father was. 8 months ago, she had done a DNA ancestry test, and Daniel's name had come up. She had reached out through the testing company's messaging system. He had almost deleted it. He had stared at it for 3 days before he responded. And then the two of them had started what he described as the most surreal, tender, terrifying series of conversations of his life. Getting to know a sister he never knew he had. A sister who had grown up an only child, who had lost her mother 2 years ago, who was now entirely alone in the world except for this half-brother she had found through a piece of mail and a swab of her cheek. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. My voice came out quieter than I expected. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Because you were drowning." I opened my mouth to argue, and he shook his head gently. "Not in a bad way," he said. "In a Maya way. In a being a new mom way. I have watched you give everything you have to her every single day, and I have been so proud of you, Rach. I have. But there was no room." He paused. "Every time I thought about bringing this up, you were up at midnight with a fever, or stressed about the daycare, or exhausted, or just finally asleep after a hard week. And this is a big thing. This is not a small thing I could drop into a conversation between dinner and dishes." And I kept thinking, I'll wait until the right moment. And the right moment never came. "So you just handled it alone," I said. "I tried to," he said. "For 8 months. For 8 months. I sat with that for a long time. And then I asked him about that night. About why they were at the hospital. And his expression shifted into something I recognized. That same interior, careful look he had been wearing for 4 months. Christine, he told me, had been diagnosed in September with early-stage breast cancer. She was 34 years old. She was single, no children, no family to speak of in the city. She had an oncologist at St. Michael's, and she had started a new round of treatment 3 weeks ago. Daniel had been driving to the hospital on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, his reading nights, to sit with her during her sessions and drive her home. He had rescheduled 2 work trips to do it. He had told his office the cover story and then felt sick about lying, but he had not known what else to do. That night, when I texted him, he had just walked Christine to her car after a hard session. She had received news that week that the treatment was working but that there was a longer road ahead than they had hoped. She had cried in the parking lot. He had held her, and I had seen it. He told me all of this, and then he stopped talking, and the room was very quiet, and I could feel the weight of 8 months of secrecy sitting between us like a third person on the bed. "I'm not angry at you for keeping this from me," I said eventually. "I need you to know that I understand why you did it." I took a breath. "But I need you to also know that it nearly broke something tonight. Something that would have been very hard to put back together." He nodded. He didn't try to minimize it or deflect it. He just nodded. "You should have told me," I said. "Not because I would have handled it perfectly. Maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I was too deep in the fog to handle it well. But I needed to be given the chance." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes were wet. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Rachel." We sat there for a long time without saying anything else. The monitor crackled softly. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street. Then I said, "I want to meet her." He looked up. "I want to meet Christine," I said. "She's your family. That makes her mine too. And she's going through this alone, and that's not okay." I paused. Nobody should go through that alone. He reached across the space between us and took my hand. And for a moment, neither of us said anything, and that silence felt completely different from all the silences we'd had over the past several months. This one didn't press against me. This one felt like something opening instead of something closing. I met Christine the following Saturday. Daniel drove us to a small Italian restaurant not far from the hospital, the kind of place with red checkered tablecloths and bread that comes out warm. She was already there when we arrived, sitting at a corner table, and she stood up when she saw us, and she was tall like Daniel, with the same way of holding her shoulders that I had noticed in him 1,000 times and never had a name for until that moment. She was nervous. I could see it in the way she refolded her napkin twice before we sat down. And I understood it, because I was nervous too. But within about 10 minutes, something settled. She told me about growing up in Vermont, about her mother, about the specific strange grief of doing a DNA test and waiting for results and not knowing what you wanted the answer to be. She told me about the first time she video called Daniel and how they both sat there in silence for almost a full minute before either of them knew what to say. She laughed when she told that part, and Daniel laughed too, and the laugh was the same. I noticed it immediately. The same rhythm. The same small exhale at the end. She asked me about Maya, and I showed her pictures on my phone, and her face did something that I can only describe as completely unguarded. Like someone who has been careful for a very long time and briefly forgot to be. She looks like you, Christine said. She has his nose, I said. She really does, Christine said, glancing at Daniel. And we both laughed, and Daniel looked mildly offended, and it was the most normal thing in the world. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet in the way he used to be quiet, the comfortable kind, not the interior kind. He had one hand on the wheel and the other on mine, and the streetlights moved over us one after another. "Thank you," he said, not looking at me. "Don't thank me," I said. "She's your sister. You should have told me." "I know, but I understand why you didn't." He squeezed my hand. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know you did," I said. "That's the part I had to think about. Because you weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself from having to watch me carry one more thing." I looked at him. "And I get that. I really do. But Daniel, I am your wife. I am supposed to carry things with you. That is the whole point." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then, you're right. I'm usually right," I said. He laughed, and it surprised both of us. And then I laughed too, and Maya made a noise from the backseat that wasn't quite a word yet, but was clearly an opinion, and we laughed harder. Later that night, after Maya was down and the house was quiet, I lay in bed and thought about how close I had come. How close I had come to sending that video to someone. To calling my mother in a panic. To letting the worst-case story write itself so completely in my head that no amount of truth would have been able to reach me through it. I thought about what I had almost done, and I felt something that was equal parts relief and shame. Relief that I had waited. Shame that I had needed to see everything fall apart before I asked a single question. And I thought about something Christine had said over dinner, almost offhandedly, about the moment she found out her diagnosis. She said the first thing she felt was not fear, it was loneliness. I thought, "Who do I call?" she said. That was the first thought. Not what's going to happen to me, but who do I even tell? Nobody should have to ask that question. Not her. Not Daniel. Not me. Not any of us. The hardest part of loving someone for a long time is that you can start to assume the love is self-sustaining, like a plant that waters itself. Like something that will simply continue as long as nobody actively destroys it. But love is not like that. It is more like a fire. It needs tending. It needs someone to notice when it is burning low and to do something about it before it goes out entirely. Daniel had been tending something in secret for 8 months, alone, because he had looked at our life and decided I didn't have room for one more thing. And maybe he had been right. Or maybe he had been wrong, and I had been too wrapped up in my own exhaustion to show him otherwise. Probably both things were true at the same time, the way things usually are. What I know for certain is this: the night I sat in that parking lot and watched my husband hold a woman I didn't recognize, I made a choice. I chose to text him instead of texting someone else. I chose to wait instead of running. I chose to sit in the dark and hear him out instead of shutting the door. And that choice, small and frightened as it was, turned out to be the one that mattered most. Christine had her 4th treatment session 2 weeks ago. Daniel drove her, and this time I went too. I sat in the waiting room with a coffee and a book I didn't read, and when she came out 2 hours later looking pale and tired, she saw me and stopped walking for a second. Then she walked over and sat down next to me and put her head on my shoulder, and I let her, and we sat there for a while without saying anything. She is part of our family now. It happened quietly and quickly, the way the most real things usually do. And Daniel and I? We are different now. Not fixed, because we were never exactly broken, but different. More deliberate. More careful with each other in the way that people get when they have had a close call and know it. We have a standing date on Friday nights, just an hour after Maya goes down, just the two of us, and whatever takeout we can agree on. We talk about things we had stopped talking about. We ask each other questions that are not about schedules. Last Friday, he asked me what I had been thinking about lately, not about Maya, not about work, but just in general. What was living in my head? And I told him. All of it, the things I had been carrying quietly, the worries I had been solving alone because I didn't want to add to his weight. And he listened. And then he told me his things, and it was the most ordinary conversation in the world, and I cried a little, and he didn't ask me why, because he already knew. Relationships don't fail all at once. They thin slowly, one missed conversation at a time, one assumption left unquestioned, one heavy thing carried alone when it should have been shared. And sometimes it takes a parking lot at midnight, and a woman you don't recognize, and your heart dropping into your shoes to remind you to stop assuming the fire is taking care of itself. That night, I thought I was losing everything. Instead, I found out how much I still had, and how much more carefully I intended to hold it going forward.